Hey, what's going on, everybody? This is Jake from College Football Redzone coming at you with another team breakdown as we continue the spring first look series here on the channel. We take a look at all 138 FBS programs from that 50,000 feet perspective, letting you know a little bit of that. Hey, this is what we're looking at in terms of like notable players that entered and left the program, as well as a spring record prediction for you as well entering this season. And today we have a fun team to talk about. It's been a pretty good G6 program over the last couple of years. The UConn Huskies is going to be the topic of this particular first look as we get a little bit closer to that top 100. Not quite a top 100 team, but still, I think a solid G6 program in spite of some of the losses that they took in over the course of the offseason as well. So very excited to talk about the UConn Huskies in today's breakdown. And if you're excited as well, make sure you go ahead, hit that like button, and then hit that subscribe button as well if you do happen to be brand new, because it does take a tremendous amount of time to go out and to record all of 138 team breakdowns, get them up on YouTube, do the graphics. It's a lot of work in the background. So if you guys can help a brother out, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, that would truly mean the world to me. I would genuinely appreciate that. But let's go ahead and get things rolling here with the UConn Huskies, which, as I mentioned, and as the title of this video suggests, they come in as my 102nd ranked team in college football entering this season. And man, this UConn football team, this was a special team to truly watch last year, nearly winning 10 games. But that's not even the full story. All of their regular season losses were you had to go into overtime in order to beat these guys. And it was really fascinating to see because in the overtime games that UConn played in last year, they went 0-3. But when this team, was able to finish the game in regulation outside of the bowl game, which the bowl game does have some notable caveats because of some notable opt-outs on that UConn football team towards the end of last year, UConn finished 9-0. So even though this was a spectacular year for the Huskies going 9-4, and they did the same thing the previous year as well, there was really a space that existed where they could have finished undefeated. And can you imagine if they flipped those overtime games and finished undefeated over the course of the regular season? No conference championship, so they wouldn't have had access to the G6 auto bid. It would really created an uncomfortable conversation in terms of, should a 12-0 UConn team be a part of the college football playoff last year? I think it would create, certainly don't know if they would have gotten in as one the at large, but it would have certainly created an uncomfortable conversation because for me, it doesn't matter if you what your strength of schedule is like. If you finish undefeated, there should be space for you in a 12-team playoff because that's incredibly hard to do regardless of what your strength of schedule is like. And the strength of schedule that you can't really control that necessarily because many of the times that is set years down the road and definitely is that way as the life of an independent. And UConn is certainly independent, but they're going to have to replace some key guys. And it starts with their head coach in Jim Mora, who departed to take the head coaching job at Colorado State. It was a little bit of a surprise to see him make that jump because you certainly could have made the argument that while Colorado State might have been foreseen as a better job, I wouldn't go so far as to say that it was a significantly better job. I actually think UConn and Colorado State, just in terms of how those programs have been the last 5 years, be about at the same level, albeit maybe Colorado State having a little bit more potential, being in a little bit more of a talent-rich state. But I, just with how UConn has been, I feel like they were about the same level as Colorado State personally. But they also have to replace two NFL players and was arguably one of the best connections in the G6 last year, whether it's Joe Fagano at the quarterback position. And I'm actually was really surprised that he didn't get more NFL buzz. And, I hope he gets a shot in the NFL because he was truly spectacular to watch, took really good care of the ball. And then Skylar Bell as well, who is probably the most notable piece that left his program. Skylar Bell looking to be a day two pick in the NFL draft, so that's going to be a big loss as well for the UConn Huskies. And just looking at what they did to backfill, they didn't really bring any quarterbacks in who are going to bring the same level of experience as Joe Vagano. They did bring in Jake Metwerker and Caleb Osborne, but neither of them have really played very much. And then really no wide receivers that they brought in through the transfer portal either that actually go ahead and bring the same type of productivity that Skylar Bell had. But it's not just those two positions that they lost. They definitely lost some luster in the like the offensive line. Ben Murakowski is going to be a tough loss. He ends up transferring to Michigan State, and he was someone that had breakout potential as going from being like just a good starter to possibly a star player in the G6 ranks. So losing him on the offensive line and protecting that blind side, that's a really difficult loss that you're going to have there. You also end up losing Cam Edwards, who had over 1,000 yards of total offense too. They did bring in Kenji Christian to replace courtesy of Jason Candle, leaving Toledo and taking this head coaching job at UConn as well. He brings a couple other players that have some production too, but I've generally it's like Kenji Christian wasn't on the same level as Cam Edwards on. Cam Edwards might have been quietly one of the better running backs in the entire G6 last year too. But more of the losses taking place on the defensive side of the ball. They lost two starting DBs in Lee Millette III, who transfers to Arizona. He had over 50 tackles and 3 pass breakups last year. But even an arguably bitter loss is Cham Chadwick, the corner that was an absolute shutdown corner for this UConn team last year. What made plays constantly around the field, 4 interceptions and 4 pass breakups. So those two, I do have some genuine concerns about their secondary. Might be as big of a concern as who is going to be playing quarterback this year, as well as the general offensive weaponry outside of Kenji Christian. I do think the defensive line actually could be a little bit better. They do bring in Eshawn Carter, who transfers from Toledo, one of the players that was on Jason Candle's team last year, follows him here to Storrs, Connecticut, to be a part of this Connecticut Huskies program. And the linebackers, I think the linebacking room is going to be a push because they do lose two linebackers to Colorado State and Duke, with Omar Damande and John Morris leaving this program yet again. But they do end up bringing in Kevon Sherman, who was one of their leading defenders last year in tackles. He had over 100 combined tackles for this Rockets team last season. Plus, you bring in John Lista as well, who is a multi-year starter at Penn, making the jump from the Ivy League to play for this UConn football team as a graduate transfer. So that's what you're looking at in terms of the linebacking core. Probably going to be a push. The defensive line could be better, and they're going to need that defensive line to be better because on the back end, there are some severe concerns on the back end. I will say that. They do one last person I do want to talk about before we get into the record prediction tonight is Joshua Mickens, who transfers from Ohio State, was part of that really deep defensive line over the last couple of years. Hasn't really played much the last couple of years as a result of that. Does have a national championship as part of that team as a fringe rotational player, but like many players that do end up committing to Ohio State initially, he was a former 4-star recruit. So, talented player that just got lost in the depth chart at Ohio State. Does have a genuine opportunity to get on the field here. Being as there isn't a ton of, let's say, blue chip guys on this Connecticut roster entering this season. So, not only is this a team that is going to be in flux and it's going to be a little bit of transition year for UConn, this is also going to be one of the years where UConn is going to have one of the more difficult schedules in the G6. Let's go ahead and check out what that schedule looks like now as I pull it up. So I do see a couple of safe wins from the jump. The Lafayette game, which is an opener, I think Jason Candle, I do like Jason Candle as a coach, so I think they handle Lafayette with relative ease. They do also have UMass at home, and UMass, they haven't beaten an FBS team in 2 to 3 years now, so I think UConn should be able to handle business against what's technically a rival in UMass, but it's been a one-sided rivalry as of late, even with outside the last 2 years where UConn football has been a little bit deplorable. So those are some safe wins, but between the UMass game, particularly when you get into mid-October through early November, it's going to be a brutal stretch outside the UMass game. Whether it's playing Syracuse, and Syracuse is expected to be a better team. That was a team that had some rough injury luck and it's being doubted a little bit. They need to prove themselves, but I think Syracuse is better than what we saw through most of last season. Temple, I think Temple is going to be an improved football team as well, but you got to go play them on the road. So that will be a tough task for UMass, or not UMass, UConn. Air Force on the road, that's a cross country road trip, and you know my feelings on cross country road trips. Typically, that does not bode well for the road team. And then North Carolina was a disaster last year. I will give that to you, but we think that North Carolina is going to be a more competent product. And even though that game is happening at home, I think North Carolina has significantly more talent than UConn going into this season. They do also have Maryland. I do think Maryland has talent to make things interesting in the Big Ten. Not a good Big Ten team, but a good enough team to where I think even at home, UConn would struggle with that too. So the ceiling is not very high because of how this schedule is shaping out. Got that 7-5 ceiling, but I don't think it's going to be a complete fall off, right? I think they're gonna struggle through this year, but it's not going to be a what we saw from Southern Miss, for example, where one year Southern Miss was playing for a CUSA title, and then the next year they went 0-12. I don't remember what year that happened, but that did happen. It's not going to be that level of collapse, but I do think they genuinely struggle through this year. I have concerns about the offensive side of the ball. I have concerns about the defensive secondary as well. So that's why I'm landing on 4 wins here. Do think that, at least in terms of the toss ups, I do think that Old Dominion is going to be in a transitional year after losing Colton Joseph, among some other key players on that team last year. I like Ricky Ron as a coach, and I think he has them overall trending in the right direction. But even when you're trending in the right direction, you're not going to always improve every single year. And I think it's going to be that type of season for Old Dominion. So I think having them at home, I think UConn wins that. And then even Southern Miss on the road. If this game was happening at home, this is a safe win. But because of the fact that it is happening on the road, we're calling it a toss up, but we're leaning towards UConn because we don't really that roster was gutted in the transfer portal, and we don't have a lot of trust at this time in Blake Anderson. So 4-8, is going to be looking at that for the overall record, but I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are in the comment section down below. Do I have UConn too high? Do I have them a little bit too low? Always am curious to hear your thoughts, like in the comment section. And if you enjoyed these team breakdowns, I would really appreciate it if you hit the like button, as well as hit that subscribe button as well, if you do happen to be brand new, because that genuinely helps me out tremendously, and it's a lot of work that goes into doing these breakdowns for each of these individual teams. So I would truly appreciate that. In the meantime, this is Jake from College Football Red Zone signing off. Hoping you guys are all out there taking it easy, and take care, everybody.